Pro-Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, you've often heard politicians or others say that they're pro-life except for the case of rape, incest, and the health of the mother. And today we're going to interview someone who was conceived in rape and get her thoughts on this matter. Our guest today grew up after she was conceived in rape, grew up feeling worthless than others, and also became a target of human trafficking and prostitution by her 14th birthday. She also had to, in her early years, had to fake an abortion just to get free from the man that was holding her that threatened her death if she were to not abort a baby. She has become a practicing nurse for 26 years and worked in pro-life ministry for the last 20 years. And she's spoken in many venues, the New Hampshire legislature, public events, schools and churches, and she's also been the president of, I think, the New Hampshire Right to Life. And currently, and where I met her was down at the March for Life, was the Save the One group. If you ever Google those words, Save the One, numeral one, she's on there along with others, and she'll tell us what it's all about. Well, welcome.
Well, thank you for having me.
Great to have you.
Tremendous honor to be here.
Darlene Pawlik. Darlene, first of all, what is Save the One? What is that?
Save the One is a group of people conceived by rape, incest, or with fetal anomalies. And it's that 1% that are usually called the exceptions when someone has a law or a candidate's position. They'll say, I'm pro-life except. And so we're a group of people who will stand up and say, we're not exceptions, we're people. I'm a person, I'm not an exception. And it was founded on the scripture where Jesus said that if he would leave the 99 and go and save the one. And I picture him in my mind reaching out for that one. And when he reaches out for that one, he brings in all of the rest of them at the same time. That 1% of abortions that are the exceptions, if they're saved, if those most marginalized are brought in, then all the rest of them will be saved too.
I see. Now, we have a trailer that you brought with you, and perhaps we could take a look at that trailer, because there's a lot of different situations and a lot of people that have the same feeling that you do. Perhaps we could show that trailer now.
My daughter's birth mother was raped at 13.
When I was 12 years old, I was walking down the street. I was brutally raped by 2 men, and I became pregnant.
That night, the same man drugged, and he raped me.
At the age of 17, after having lived most of my life in an abusive situation with extended family, I conceived through incestuous rape.
The abortion did not make my rape any better. In fact, it made it 100 times worse, because not only was I dealing with killing my child, it was constant nightmares about the rape over and over and over again.
I went through rape and I went through my pregnancy and I got through it, and I believe that if I would have had an abortion, I would be more scarred and more hurt now than I would have choosing life.
It's worth it. You will learn an unconditional love.
And I ended up calling my mom. She said, that man raped me. That man raped me.
My life started when my birth mother came out of a bar and she was raped.
My birth mother at 17 years old was violently raped, and as a result became pregnant with me.
She told the social worker that I was the result of a date rape and that she wished that I would have been aborted.
My mother was abused by her father for many years, and of the 6 pregnancies, I was the second child conceived and the only survivor. The 4 subsequent pregnancies were terminated through abortion.
My biological father is a rapist. I don't even know my ethnicity, but I am still a human being, and I still have value, and my life isn't worth less than yours just because of the way I was conceived, and I don't believe that I deserve the death penalty because of the crime of my biological father.
As a rape-conceived person, I take this very personally, and I take the exceptions included in law very personally.
These children are loved and wanted and are every bit as valued.
There's no life, and especially the unborn, that's expendable.
When people make the rape exception, or when they say that they're pro-choice, especially in cases of rape, that's like saying to me that I think your mother should have been able to abort you, which is like saying if I had my way, you'd be dead right now. And some people would say, you know, it's nothing against you personally. Well, it affects me personally.
Well, now, Darlene, when you see that video clip, it really gives you a potpourri of different people, different situations, and what would you have to add? For instance, what about being pregnant as a result of rape or incest? How can anyone force women to carry a baby to term after such a, as they view it, such a tragedy?
Well, I think that abortion is also a tragedy, and what someone who would suggest she should have an abortion is doing is suggesting that you add tragedy to tragedy, and it makes it so much worse. As my friend Ashley said, that she had an abortion after her rape-conceived child, and it just made it so much worse. Pregnancy is temporary. It's always going to be temporary. So what you're saying is she should have a permanent abortion to a temporary situation, and that's just not the best way for the woman, and it's certainly not the best for a child conceived in rape. The child is never the aggressor. The child never did anything wrong and shouldn't receive the death penalty. We don't even give the death penalty to rapists. Rapists don't receive the death penalty.
Yes, I believe the U.S. Supreme Court had spoke to that degree. And what about the woman who has been raped or incest and has a child? Psychologically for her, she's got friends, supposed friends, counseling her to have an abortion, but don't many of these raped women keep their child? And
yes, well, my mother did.
Uh-huh.
She saw me as a second victim. She intrinsically knew that she was the only person who could protect me, and that I was just a second victim. We were in it together, as she said. And so I think that every woman actually has that in her, even if she's going through trauma and she's having a hard time. My friend Ashley, who had an abortion after she was had conceived by a rape, said that she went to all of her friends and she just wanted someone, anyone, to say, it's okay, you can have this baby, you're going to get through it. Because it is a temporary situation. Mm-hmm. It's not permanent. Mm-hmm.
And as pregnancy is not a disease.
True enough.
So now you hear this, I'm personally pro-life. This drives me crazy, particularly amongst the politicians. I'm personally pro-life, but I'm for a woman's right to choose. Who are we to impose our morality on others? How would you respond to something like that?
Well, I could say that I'm personally pro-life, but the guy down the street wants to kill his mother, then that's okay too, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it's the same logic, isn't it? It's the same thing. So we do impose our morality on others every day because we say that murder is against the law, and we say that stealing is against the law. So you're really talking about something that's already been decided. It's a done deal. We do impose our morality on other people. Mm-hmm.
And what if, for instance, the baby has a terminal illness or disease? Would that reduce the child's quality of life? How would you respond to something like that?
Well, I would suggest that no one has a crystal ball. You can't tell what anyone's quality of life is going to be, and nobody has a perfect life. So who are you to decide? It seems to me you're very elitist if you are the one who says, well, your quality of life isn't good enough, so I'm going to take it away. That's a position of making decisions for other people that can't be extrapolated. You can't go into the future and say this is not going to be a good life. I actually sat across the table from my mother-in-law's cousin who read a newspaper article about a child who was abused. And she said, oh, it would have been better if that child was aborted because the child had been abused by by her father. And I thought to myself, How can you say that? Because that was me. It could have been a story about me. I was abused as a small child, but I would rather be here. I'd rather be alive than be killed, brutally torn apart limb from limb. That's not a decision I think that people should be able to make.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And, you know, when you hear people refer to rape and incest, and they're trying to say, oh, except in the case of rape and incest, do they ever broach the topic that abortion might be mentally or emotionally harmful to women? Does that even come across their minds?
I think it doesn't. I think they think, oh, this woman, in particular, when it comes to rape and incest, there's a confused compassion that happens. They think it would be better for the woman not to have the baby because they think it's the rapist baby. But it's really her baby. It's her baby. It's not the rapist baby. And she's the only one that can protect that baby. She's the only one in the whole world that can protect that child. And that emotional trauma that comes from not protecting your child has to be out of this world. And I know it to be true because as you said, I was president of Right to Life for a little while. I've also been director of the Educational Trust in New Hampshire. And so I have a lot of exposure to people who have had abortions. And many, many, many people tell me, I've been hurting for years and years and years. I've not told anybody for 20 years, or this has been something that's tormented me for so long. And I think that we have to recognize that, yes, the victim of rape needs counseling. She needs help, she needs healing, but she doesn't need to kill her baby. That's going to compound it. It's going to make it worse for most women. Right. It's going to be traumatic. She would become an executioner of her own baby, and as you said, the baby hasn't really done anything wrong. Mm-hmm. What if, for instance, the mother's life was in danger, say the boyfriend or whomever? I mean, you had a situation yourself. Maybe you could tell a little bit about your situation when you were pregnant and someone threatened your life. Well, as a victim of human trafficking from the age of 14 to the age of 18, at 17 years old I got pregnant, and the man who had me as a house pet insisted, he demanded, with his fist on the table, he wanted no life. He said that if I didn't have an abortion, he would kill me. And he'd had a flunky that had brutalized me numerous times that I knew he would kill me. There was no question in my mind. And in that time, I actually had a dream. I made the appointment in front of him. And then I had a dream that night of the abortion procedure in living color. And it was a supernatural dream. There's no way I could have known what would happen in the natural world, but I had a supernatural dream of the abortion proceedings. And in the morning, I managed to find someone who could help me out. And so I had made the appointment, and I told him I was going to go through with it, and I had dinner with him that night. And so I had to pretend that I had had an abortion. And it wasn't terribly difficult because all of the feelings from the dream were so vivid and so on the surface for me that I was able to get away from this organized crime boss and get out of the situation. How did you get away from him? You had dinner that night. He thought you had had an abortion. Then how did you get out? I said to him, something happened to me on the table, and I just don't want to be with you anymore. And he bought that. He believed me. Like I said, I had the whole evening with him, and the dinner was very intimate. We were sitting as close as I'm sitting to you, with no one else around. And I said, something happened to me when I was on the table. And I was reliving the dream at the time, and so he believed me. He believed that I just wanted to get away from him and to go someplace else. I told him I had a cousin that could give me a job and that I would get out of his life and he'd never have to see me again. Mm-hmm. I see. Well, that took a lot of moxie, I'll say that much. My life was in danger. I didn't really have any choice. I see. Wow, that's something. Now, what if the baby just isn't wanted? Isn't it better not to be born than endure a life of abuse and neglect? That's one of the typical pro-abortion arguments that they use. How do you respond to something like that? Actually, I have a lot of friends who do foster care and who have adopted children. I don't think that there are any children that are unwanted. I really don't believe that that's the case at all. There's huge waiting lists. I know one woman who runs an adoption agency, and she's got waiting lists as long as my arm for people who want babies and infants. As people are looking for children, they'd like the infants more than the older children, of course, but there are lots of people that adopt the older children too. I have a friend who's adopted 5 older children.
Wow, that's really something. And then you hear people say, isn't abortion just a necessary evil? How would you respond to something like that?
I don't think abortion is a necessary evil. It's never necessary to kill a child in the mother's womb. You had asked me about the life of the mother, if the life of the mother were at stake, and then you suggested that because I had experience with that, that I would be able to speak to it, which I can, but when you have a woman who really believes her doctors, and her doctors tell her she's going to die, then I think that people suggest that abortion is a necessary evil in that situation for sure. Even if they're pro-life in every other situation, that has got to be the one. And I suggest to you that's not true. I think it's all a matter of intent. If the doctor intends to save both lives and the child dies, then that's not an abortion. And I think that when we come to the table and put it on the table and look at it in those terms, there's never a reason to intentionally go into a mother's womb and pull a baby to pieces. It's just not necessary.
And how about, I know Rebecca Kiesling has used the word, what am I, cannon fodder?
That's true.
How do you feel about that? You're part of that 1%, and what can that 1%, coming on a show like this and explaining, you know, that we shouldn't be cannon fodder, that you're real flesh and blood, and it looks like many molecules are in the right place, and what do you have to say to that? I mean, a lot of times these people that are victims of, you know, children conceived in rape and incest, they're marginalized, and say after birth, when they find out that they have been conceived in rape, they feel lesser of themselves. I think you had made mention of that in your book. How do you overcome that sort of thing, and how can society, I guess, get over this demonizing the children in the womb that have been conceived in rape, or marginalizing them? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do. The exceptions for rape and incest punch logic right in the face. And I say that because if you say that you're pro-life because the baby is a baby, and accept that that baby isn't a baby, that doesn't make any sense.
You mean the baby in the womb?
The baby in the womb.
The baby conceived
The baby conceived in rape or incest is physically and biologically no different than the baby conceived with wine and roses. They're no different. So if you want to use the logic of being pro-life, then you have to agree that a baby is a baby is a baby, no matter how they were conceived. And there are people who are against the IVF procedure because of that very fact. You've got a whole bunch of babies in a petri dish, and they're marginalized just as much as anybody that is conceived in rape, in my opinion, because they're just put in a freezer someplace. Those are babies too, and they shouldn't be used and abused the way that they are.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is the answer for our society as far as you know, these children that are conceived in rape and incest? Is it giving emotional support and financial support to the victim of rape? Is that one of the things that you do, or what?
Absolutely. Women who are raped need counseling, they need support, they need to be taken care of, and they need to be protected. And one of the big things that happens when a person is raped is they're so vulnerable because they've been violated. And to suggest that they further violate their own bodies and violate the rights of another person by having an abortion is just brutal. It's compounding a tragic situation with more tragedy. They need support, they need counseling, and they need help to get through the pregnancy and beyond. The pregnancy itself is a very temporary situation, but the rape experience can last forever for some people. There was a little old lady in one of the nursing homes that I worked at, and when this young man would walk through the hallway at night, because he was doing the night shift with me, she would always cry, and she didn't cry when my other nurses' aides were on, but she did cry when this young man was on. And finally I talked to her about it, and it was his footsteps. They sounded so strong and so deliberate as he walked down the hall that she was afraid because she had been raped as a young girl. And so I think that we need to recognize that the rape situation needs care. They need counseling. They also need support to get through the pregnancy if they are conceived of rape.
Mm-hmm. And I know that in our society, or since abortion has come to the fore the last 40 years, adoptions have dropped precipitously. What would you say, or how would our society look favorably upon adoption again? In other words, all these women who are pregnant, whether it's rape or incest, or pregnant just from their boyfriends, that how do we go about bringing adoption back to a state of a wonderful thing in our society?
Well, adoption is an option we can all live with. It's a pretty simple statement, but it packs a wallop. Adoption is something we can all live with, and there are so many people who want to adopt. I think that bringing adoption back to the forefront, like the March for Life did this year, that was their theme. They brought adoption to the forefront and said, adoption is an option we can all live with. And that way, there are babies to be had, and people are more forgiving and more receptive to it. You know, early in our history in the United States, there were abortions. It was rare, but it was rare because there were so many people who were willing to adopt those babies. It still happened, and it usually happened because young girls were in the employ of older men, and they would take advantage of them. And it's the same thing. It's statutory rape. It's very, very common to what happens today. But what happened was that we had houses, and we took care of them like the homes for unwed women that we have today.
Mm-hmm. I see. Well, now, what about people who say, well, abortion's a women's rights issue? What would you say to that? Men have nothing to do with it, and what would you say to something like that?
Well, my good friend Jason Jones had an experience where his rights as a father were taken away. And he can explain it so much better than I can, but his right as a father to have his child and to be able to protect his child were stolen from him. So I think that men definitely have rights in this situation, but also...
They were stolen because legally he had no rights.
Legally he had no rights. His girlfriend had an abortion, and he had no rights to even... no say. He had no say. He couldn't protect his child. Mm-hmm. And if you consider that probably about half the people who are aborted are probably women, then what about their rights? What about the rights of all the women that are being killed in the womb? Mm-hmm. Those rights need to be taken care of too. A woman's right is pertaining to her own body, but when you're pregnant, it's pertaining to someone else's body. When we talk about being pro-choice, we have to consider what the choice is. The choice is killing another human being.
Mm-hmm. And how about some sound bites? So we're getting towards the end of the show. Do you have any sound bites that would be representative that politicians could use, perhaps?
Sure. Abortion never unrapes a woman. We're talking about two people here when we're talking about abortion. The choice that we're talking about is the killing of another person. We need to protect women, especially if they've been raped. We need to protect them from being brutalized again through an abortion procedure. When we talk about pregnancy, and pregnancy by rape especially, we're talking about a temporary situation. And we never want to ask a woman in a crisis to make a permanent decision based on a temporary situation. It's not going to be helpful for her in the long run, and it certainly isn't helpful for the baby. When we try to impose the right to choose on a woman who is pregnant by rape, we're telling her that she is not worthy of protection, and we're telling her that her child is not worthy of protection. It's not the rapist's child, it's her child, and she's the only one who can protect it.
Uh-huh. Well, gosh, thank you so much for, first of all, braving the stormy weather here in New England to come down from New Hampshire to be on the show today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And your perspective is an important perspective for our society to understand and hopefully change their hearts and minds regarding children that are conceived in rape and incest. We thank you so much for coming down today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And we hope you enjoyed today's show. We hope you found it unique, informative, content-rich, truthful, and thought-provoking. Thanks for watching. I'm Brendan O'Connell, your friend for life. welcome Mr. James Sedlak.
Well, Brendan, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
Mr. Sedlak, could you give your assessment of the most recent Planned Parenthood annual report that came out a week or two ago?
Absolutely. What this report shows, the one that came out last week, is that in 2011, 2012, Planned Parenthood had a total income of $1.2 billion. I'll repeat that again. That's $1.2 billion with a...
Hello, welcome to Life Matters. I'm your host, Brendan O'Connell. Well, today's guest is a mother of 4 children and founder and director of Northern Ireland's leading pro-life group. In 1997, she founded Precious Life after viewing a picture of a baby killed by abortion. Well, welcome, Mrs. Bernadette Smith.
Thank you, Brendan. I'm delighted to speak to you from Ireland. As a voice for the unborn child, and I know many of the listeners will be in agreement that this is a worldwide struggle and we have to unite, and I'm here to tell you about the...
Hi, I'm Colby Mazzarella. Welcome to Life Matters, where we interview guests who protect human life from conception to natural death. Today's guest is C.J. Doyle, the Executive Director of Catholic Action League of Massachusetts. Hi, C.J. Welcome to the show.
Colby, delighted to be here.
Thank you. Tell us a little about the Catholic Action League of Massachusetts and how do you defend human life?
The Catholic Action League was founded in 1995. We were the former Massachusetts chapter of a national organization, the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. And in 1995, we became independent to concentrate entirely on Massachusetts issues. As a Catholic organization, we support the teachings of the Catholic Church in terms of protecting human life from conception to natural death. And we defend the religious freedom rights of Catholics and other religious believers and pro-lifers.